Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to those attending and also to our viewers watching live on the Council's YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. This is a meeting of the Environment, Housing and Regeneration Select Committee, and my name is Councillor Wayne Bridges and I'm chairman of this meeting. The key role of this committee is to monitor the performance of local public services within its remit and to hold in-depth reviews on topics of resident interest. We engage with a range of external witnesses in our activity, which can include community groups, residents and subject matter experts. Where we identify areas for change or improvement, we make recommendations to the decision-making cabinet. Details of the business to be considered today is shown on the agenda, copies of which are available in the room and also accessible on YouTube underneath the broadcast. For those present in the room and intending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements that you make will be recorded and made public. For those in the public gallery, you will not be on camera. A reminder to councillors, officers and those speaking today that you should turn on the microphone button on when speaking. This will ensure you can be heard in the room and by those watching online. So before we go on to our agenda, a few housekeeping rules. We're not expecting a fire alarm this evening. However, if one does sound, please follow the officers to the fire exits and out of the building to the designated meeting point, which is the Civic Centre forecourt. Mobile devices to be placed on silent or switched off. And we have resident feedback forms available at the back of the room and also underneath the broadcast for those who wish to give feedback. Also, to let you know, in light of the government changes yesterday, please feel free to remove any masks that you may be wearing. We'll leave that to your discretion. With that said, we move on to apologies for absence, please.
All members are present, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest in matters coming before this meeting? I can see no indications. Thank you very much. I can confirm that all business this evening will be discussed in part 1. With that, we go on to item 4 to agree the minutes of the previous meeting, which I trust you've all received. Are there any issues? Can we agree? Thank you very much. Item 5, the Cabinet's budget proposals for the next financial year. And a very warm welcome to Ian and Gemma, who will be presenting tonight. So whenever you're ready, please give your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this is, I suppose, our second visit as Finance to the Select Committee for the year. Back in the summer, we came and presented the framework in which we'll be setting the budget and the context. At the December meeting of Cabinet, back on the 16th of December, they agreed a set of budget proposals which are currently out to public consultation, and also through that process we come to the Select Committees to effectively provide an opportunity for you to sort of ask questions of those and scrutinise and feedback to Cabinet on those budget proposals. Within the remit of the committee, obviously we've got the general fund services and also the housing revenue account sits within this committee's remit. So if it's okay, I'll give you a brief run through of the sort of the headlines on both of the budgets for both those funds, and just touch on the specific proposals within the committee, and then if it's sort of pass over to the committee for any questions you may have. So general fund budget proposals. So our projections for income are based on the government funding that's likely to come through off the back of the Spending Review 2021, which was published late last year. And we're also looking at, in the medium term, 1% per annum social care precept to support growing demand in that area, and 1.8% on core council tax, reflecting effectively sort of ongoing inflationary pressures. So what that would do is that would generate an extra £32 million, or sort of circa 10% uplift in funding available to fund local services over the 5-year period. Fortunately, on the flip side of that period, we're looking at a £64 million uplift through inflation, growing demand from a growing population and changing demands from that population. So together that would leave us £34 million adrift. However, to date, we've got an indicative savings programme of £30 million worked up, so in the medium term we're looking at a £4 to £5 million gap that still needs to be addressed. However, the budget proposals for the 22-23 financial year, so the one that we're sort of consulting on and talking about at the minute, those are fully balanced, and they're balanced without any reliance on general balances. So the Council retains around 26 million of general balances to deal with emerging pressures and risks. I think it's worth commenting specifically on COVID-19 and how that's factored into the budget. So obviously there are significant pressures the Council's been facing over the last couple of years. Looking at the ongoing impact, around £7 million of that budget gap that we're dealing with has been driven directly by the pandemic. That's costed in, but obviously we will keep that under review as we go forward and revise that estimate as we really see what that looks like in the medium term. However, I think it's worth noting that with only £4 million gap left in the medium term, I think that shows the Council's making significant headway towards bridging sort of any potential ongoing COVID legacy. Alongside the revenue budget, we've got significant capital investments included, which I won't go into the details of just now, but it does include obviously significant tranche of funding for carbon reduction initiatives, which I know links in nicely to a later item on the agenda, so I'll leave that to David to comment on later. Within the committee's remit for the 22-23 financial year, interestingly, the spend on services in the committee, I believe, is rising by £12,000 when you compare it year on year. Obviously, that's a net position whereby we've got inflation going in and additional funding for demand, particularly on waste disposal. In the growing population means there's more waste to dispose of. But we've effectively presenting within the services within the committee's remit an efficiency programme which kind of consumes its own smoke and allows us to continue to deliver services within the same relatively similar cash envelope. So I suppose that's the general fund side of the budgets. Very briefly on the housing revenue account. The council's housing revenue account is set within the context of a 30-year business plan. So the rents are recycled to support that housing provision. Those rents going forward are linked to CPI plus 1% in line with government formula rents. And effectively what that means is we've got a stable business plan and we're going to be able to offer that affordable housing well into the future. Within those budget proposals, just to highlight a couple of key areas, there is provision included to deliver 100 new homes per annum in terms of increasing affordable housing supply. Top of that, there's 369 new homes being delivered through the Regeneration schemes, which that's replacing some units, so it's a gain of 185 units, so it's definitely a lot of investment in new housing. Alongside that, there's an enhanced programme of renewals of the existing estate. So over a 5-year period, we're looking at sort of cyclical renewal of things like kitchens, bathrooms, kind of key components. So I think on both general fund and HRA, we're looking at sort of sustainable, balanced budgets in the medium term that continue to deliver services for residents. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'd invite questions from members if there are any. Councillor Kaufman.
With regard to existing housing stock, are we going to start to sort of increase the standard by which we actually decorate the existing housing stock? And is there a rolling programme to do this? Also sort of replacing, I don't know, cookers, washing machines, etc., etc.
In terms of the specific spec inside the units, I've not got that immediately to hand, but confirm. But the rolling programme of renewals, so I'm not quite sure where we draw the line in terms of things like the white goods and the utensils. But I was going to say, I believe a colleague may be able to assist, so I will hand over.
Dan?
By an amazing coincidence. It's a good question, and actually we have, in fact, I came from a meeting with cabinet members just yesterday, and it's called the minimum lettable standard. I mean, it is something we're reviewing. I mean, certainly for some families who move into council accommodation, very able and very willing to decorate, and do what they need to. Others will need more support. So we're looking at actually changing and amending the standard so that actually there is a slightly different offer depending upon what your need is. In respect of white goods, then in some accommodation we do provide white goods for families who really have nothing when they first move in.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.
Do you wish to follow up, or are you happy?
Oh, that's fine. Thanks,
okay.
Chairman.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Sticking with the housing topic, so on page 9 with point 22, the delivery of the 100 new homes per annum, that's acquisition or a combination of building?
So it's a combination of both building and acquisition, but definitely more skewed towards building rather than acquisition.
Yep.
And also, I'm just trying to find it. The regeneration of playgrounds, is this on the playgrounds on housing land only or in green spaces? I think it's just housing only, isn't it?
So there are within both sides of the capital programme, we've got playground replacement programmes. So there's budgets in place within the HRA to replace those on estates, and there's budgets in the general fund to renew those on sort of general open spaces.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Councillor Kaufman, can you turn your microphone off, please? Okay, well that was very brief then. So, if that's the case, I would refer members back to page 5 with the recommendation that the committee notes the budget projections contained within the report and comments as appropriate, which will then be passed back to the Corporate Services Committee, I believe. So in terms of comments that they wish to be taken forward from this committee, maybe I could perhaps start by just noting the good news in these reports, such as Councillor Farley mentioned, the playground refurbishments, very important projects going on in both Chrysalis and on housing land. And I think the majority of playgrounds have been refurbished, but they are rapidly working their way through it. I know in my own ward a number of them have been done, as well as other projects such as the ward budgets and other schemes that are available not only to us as members but also members of the public. The regeneration projects in Hayes, for example, Avondale and Hayes Town Centre estates is very encouraging to see, and increase in our housing supply, not only private sector housing but social housing by about 100 households, I believe, as the report referred to. So all very encouraging stuff. It's just a shame that inflation seems to have eaten into a very big chunk of what we was going to deliver anyway in terms of savings and efficiencies. But unfortunately that's the economics for us, unfortunately. And the homeless prevention as well, which I noted in the report, has saved funding just by changing the actual way it works rather than cutting actual funding itself, and improving it in the long term, which is very encouraging to note. So those are my comments as chairman. I don't know if there are any other comments from other members who wish to contribute, but if not, those are the ones I'm proposing that this committee takes forward. Are there any further additions to that?
Very much covered.
Can you use your microphone?
I think you very much covered it there, Chairman, to be honest, very comprehensive.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to the officers for your attendance this evening, and on that basis we'll note that and send those comments forwards on this committee, and you can free to leave whenever you wish to do so. Thank you very much. Okay, item 6 is a progress update on the Climate Action Strategic Plan, and we have David with us this evening. Warm welcome to you, David. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation to members. Can you use your microphone, please?
Yes, of course, sorry. Thank you very much, Chairman. As you said, this report here is to update the committee on progress with the Climate Action Plan, the strategic plan, since its adoption by Cabinet in July last year. And the report is identifying some of the things that have gone on since then in order to embed the plan within the organisation. Now, the approach that we have taken in the Council, amongst colleagues and officers, is to try and create a solid foundation and unlock the expertise of individual officers working in their respective areas, because we kind of view those as the experts that can integrate climate action into their work. So part of what we've been doing is briefing those managers, understanding what levels of steering and governance are needed within the officer set as such across the different teams and departments, and also in doing that, in briefing them on how we feel the plan needs to work, identifying the work that is already going on around the Council, which gives us our baseline for the action plans. And within that, we can then link their work to the strategic objectives and understand a little bit more about what we need to put in the action plans to help us reach our targets. So that's where a lot of the work has been, and in particular, we've taken a top-down approach to go to CMT first of all, brief them on how we think this plan should work and what needs to happen. CMT were in agreement with that and have established that each quarter they will run a governance review on progress with the plan to make sure things are on track. They also authorised for heads of service at SMT level to act as a steering function to enable their officers and departmental managers to start integrating climate action into their service plans. And part of the work I've done is to take a briefing approach at all these different levels, using teams, doing online briefing sessions to raise the awareness of the plan. The communications team, I've noted them in the report because I feel they've done a lot of work in raising the awareness across the organisation and publicly about what the Council's actually doing, and we're looking to develop those web pages even more over the next few months and bring in various different strands to make it more visible and more public about what the council's actually doing. The other thing I've identified in there is the work that we've been doing with Mark's team. When Mark put his housing strategy out for consultation, there was a lot of internal work there which has allowed us to map goals from the strategic plan across to the housing strategy. And the reason for making a recommendation in there is to really try and put across the value of that exercise, of how officers working together can identify the importance of their work in relation to climate action. Ian and Gemma mentioned the MTFF, and in the budget there is a substantial amount of money, £25 million over the next 5 years, that's been identified in support of climate action work in relation primarily to the property and infrastructure side. And I wanted to sort of make note of the importance of that money to enable some of these objectives to be met, but also how critical it would be for that MTFF funding to help us unlock other areas of funding that we have, such as Section 106 monies and potentially community infrastructure levy monies as well, because in some cases Section 106 will not fund all of a project, but if the council is able to bring in some additional funding, then we can proceed with the project. And the type of things we'll be looking at will be how do we decarbonise our top 25 buildings in terms of their energy use, how do we invest in renewable power, things like solar power, for example, large-scale solar photovoltaic arrays, investment in the fleet, so we're looking at renewing a number of light vehicles next year and identifying sums of money that will help us switch from fossil fuel vehicles, so petrol and diesel, across to electric or hybrid. And the monies identified in the MTFF would support that. There's also the Capital Works programme, where we're looking at putting up new buildings, potentially schools or housing, and previously we may have only been able to go to a building regulations compliant business case, but the funding here would help us unlock the options to go further with sustainable development and climate action. And there's also the link, of course, to regeneration work and large-scale projects such as Hayes, where it's possible that MTF funding may augment existing funding going into that project. So that's a brief tour of what's been going on. It's really about embedding this in the organisation, identifying funding and identifying what we're already doing that is good, promoting it, and identifying additional funding to help us go further and meet our targets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, David. Questions from members? We'll start with Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, thanks. It's quite an interesting paper, but on page 18, two-thirds of the way down, we've got the council also committed to increasing its accountability and transparency on climate change action by proactively including young people in the process, ensuring they have a voice in shaping the future. How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? And where it says ensuring that they have a voice in shaping the future, I wish it was, you put it's essential that they have a voice in shaping their future, because that's the most important thing. So I'd like to know when you're going to start it and how you're going to do it, because at the moment I think a lot of young people feel that they're not listened to. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. And yes, that was the amendment that came through the motion from, I think was it Councillor Mathers in November, where full council agreed to these additional items. So to come back to your question, in terms of working with young people, there is a plan, an action plan to be developed within the strategic plan, which is for schools and young people. And I've engaged with children's social care and also our education managers to start unpicking how we might do that. We've already identified links through to the role of the council as the corporate parent and the work we do with children in our care, but we've also looking across obviously to the schools and how we integrate climate action into the curriculum, how it's already supported in the curriculum. So we're identifying the how of what we might do and how we might engage with young people. In terms of the when, I think over the next few months up till April, that's going to be critical in the development of all of these plans, and there will be more work going on. But in terms of specific actions, I don't think I could say anything at the moment without further engagement with schools colleagues and with the social care side of things. I really want to come up with some sort of firmer actions that we get into the action plan and present that in April, along with the raft of other plans that we've got.
Councillor Gardner, do you wish to add anything further? Okay. Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. Given that we actually know the roads that are sort of chock-a-block every day, are we going to sort of start to measure this output and see which roads really do need something doing with them, with regarding getting them down to getting the carbon emissions down of these roads? I mean, I can tell you one road, which is the West End Road, which about 44,000 cars go down every day. And it needs measuring to see where we are with some of these big roads, to see what we're going to do or whether they fit into your plan. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor. I think that would probably be addressed within the air quality action plan,
okay,
which we already have in place and was adopted by Council in 2019, I believe, and I can review that and update you as to what measurement we're actually doing in that particular area and around the council, and send you a synopsis of it. But measurement is a key part of that plan, and there are a series of actions built around that to help reduce or mitigate. An example of that would be the green screens that have been put up around on roadsides, particularly by schools and play areas, where we're using hedgerows and trees to help screen the play areas from the pollution.
So that's so important. In where I live, I mean, we started to plant sort of bulbs, all sorts of things down the roads to mitigate the exhaust, etc.
Thank you very much. In saying that, I'd also refer you to page 20, which provides the link to the Air Quality Action Plan. If you haven't read it, I would recommend you do so. It's a very good report which outlines what the proposals are for the improving the air quality in the borough. Do you wish to add anything further, Councillor Kaufman?
Yeah, just one thing. With regard to new housing, we could actually really look at sort of bringing the emissions down, the heat loss down from housing by various means, of insulation, all sorts of things, and different types of heating appliances. Are we sort of looking at developers to ask them that that's the way we want to drive it, and what are they going to do? Well, we need to be putting specifics down to actually, stop the hot air going out the house, to put it in a nutshell.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yes, there are requirements placed on developers, primarily through the building regulations, Part L. That's the key document for energy efficiency in homes on new build. That's the key one, but there's also requirements for larger developments within the London Plan to work towards the lowest possible carbon emissions, and it's going to become even more important, not just from the carbon emissions perspective, but noting the link across to housing from the fuel poverty angle as well, which is going to be, I think, critical for a lot of residents, particularly as the energy price cap changes around April and potentially again later in the year. So certainly on new build properties, we look to Part L and to go further where we can. But the council has also managed to deploy quite a substantial amount of government funding into its own social housing stock to improve insulation measures. And one of the things we'll be doing with housing colleagues over the next year is trying to understand what more we can do in the private sector to help our residents in freehold or private sector rented accommodation with their energy. Thank you very much, Councillor.
Thank you. Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, David. It's good to see you before I can see you again. I've got a couple of questions. On the report, the way this is being embedded within the structure, and the way this is being embedded, is this being incorporated into, again, depending how far down the organisation we're talking about, in being embedded into sort of personal objectives or managers, or further down, or how far down do you think that would necessarily need to go to ensure that it's embedded, if you feel that's sort of the way to go with it, but if we incorporate that into personal objectives, to see how, again, depending on what kind of task people are doing, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. That's a very interesting observation. That's something I hadn't made a link to, so I will take that one away. But it does strike me that it's something that could be done where managers in particular have a capability to do something about it. So they may be in the housing side, planned works. If this becomes a line within, if it's in their service plan first of all, then they link their personal objectives to that, and by virtue it may then cascade down even further to individual officers. So I think that's one we'll take away, Dan, and see how we can incorporate that. Thank you.
Do you wish to have a follow-up, Councillor Farley?
Thank you, Chair. Also with the report, just to be clear, I think I know all the answers. It's just between page 18 and 16. So under sustainable approach, the first paragraph, talking about when we think about the target of being carbon neutral, and then we compare that to page 18, the first bullet point in the centre, where it refers to net carbon zero. I'm assuming that's specifically to do because it's to do with procurement from outside entities. The reason why we have that distinction.
Yes, Councillor. What we have first of all is the carbon neutral target for the council, which relates to our own operations, the things that are within our direct financial management control. So this building is a good example of that. But we then have the procured services, and what council elected to do in November was to extend that target to the services that we are buying in, and trying to drive carbon neutrality into the supply chain as well. And then there's the longer-term net zero commitment of the UK government for 2050 as well to consider. So a couple of different things that it can get a little bit blurred, but that's the essence of it.
Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. A very good report. Thank you, David. When is this due to start being implemented? I'm speaking specifically about things like flood mitigation, because that sort of works often outside of budget cycles, and I know that there's government grants available from the Environment Agency, etc., and we don't want to miss those.
Yeah, I mean, there's 16 or so plans in there, and I think it'd be fair to say that some of them, there are various stages of implementation at the moment. The flooding action side of things, with that plan having been adopted earlier last year, I can say that I've seen quite a wide range of projects that are already being deployed around flood mitigation and alleviation. That is available on the internet, and that's one of the pages that will be developed and brought into the main climate action page within a month. In addition to that, there's also been quite a lot of community engagement, and our officers working with residents who have formed volunteer groups to help actually get those flood mitigation measures or land drainage measures implemented. So it's, if you have a look at some of those projects that have been going on already, it's quite reassuring to see those things being done, and there's more to come, I believe, with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? Okay. David, thank you very much for your attendance this evening and answering the members' questions.
There is a further one.
I know, yep.
Just to note that. Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yep.
Just to note that obviously David will be back fairly swiftly in April with a further report.
Thank you very much, David. We move now on to item 7, which is homelessness in Hillingdon. and Mark will be giving his first presentation this evening on this. So good evening, Mark, and welcome. Whenever you're ready, please give your presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. So this report was requested following the housing strategy session that we had last September. And we've split the report into 4 key areas, and I just want to expand on those quickly if I can. So initially we've talked about homeless approaches and initial interventions, and then the use and move on from temporary accommodation. We've put in some pan-London statistics as well, because we thought that was very important for you to see how we compare with other London boroughs. And of course we wanted to mention rough sleeping at the end, and we've also added some other work we're doing with housing associations and more locally with P3. So homeless approaches, as set out in the report, at the end of November we'd received 1,743 approaches, and this just breaks down as 218 per month, but actually on a more realistic sort of figure, it's 10 per working day. So at the moment it's approximately 10 per working day. We do have an online application system. However, this figure represents clients approaching the Civic directly, those referred by other agencies, because we take referrals from hospitals and prisons, etc., and online applications. The majority of our applications are online, and if a customer phones the council, they are supported through this process on the phone. We like to think we've got a very accessible online system. Throughout the COVID pandemic, our homeless reception has remained open and available to see customers who are in acute need. The biggest reason for homelessness is family and friends evictions, and that includes sofa surfers as well, and that represents 28% of all of our approaches. Domestic abuse represents 12% of our approaches, very high. It's our largest reason for emergency accommodation bookings this financial year as well. In all cases, we look to prevent homelessness where possible, and this includes work with landlords to extend tenancies and not to evict. We are currently working with about 200 landlords in order to extend tenancies and try and persuade them not to evict their current tenants. Where we do have to provide alternative accommodation, we look for affordable options in the private rented sector, and this is based on the approaching need of the households and whether it's affordable for them. And to date this year, we've made over 375 placements into the private rented sector. At the moment, we have about 430 households in temporary accommodation, and approximately about 170 of those are in short-term accommodation, which on the report is referred to as B&B. But I do want to clarify that B&B does not mean a shared accommodation where a family may be sharing a kitchen. It represents the short-term nature of it. We only use shared accommodation for single people, and indeed there's a government statutory target that if we did place a household into shared, we can only keep them there for 6 weeks, and so our policy is not to place family into shared accommodation at all. We place approximately 50 households a month into emergency accommodation. And so you can see we have a very high turnover of families with acute need coming in to see us. On the report, as I've said, we've included some pan-London statistics, and these were produced by DLUC and shared with all London authorities towards the end of last year, and they represent the previous financial year. And all the source data for this is publicly available online on the DLUC website. Hillingdon performs very well in London. We have the highest application to prevention duty ratio in the capital. And this is an important statistic because the new Homeless Reduction Act 2017 that came in 2018 sought to encourage and mandate local authorities to offer holistic casework within a statutory framework, which is what we are doing at Hillingdon. We also perform very well in accommodation outcomes, specifically sourcing accommodation for households before they are physically homeless, and that's the prevention duty. And in regards to temporary accommodation use, Hillingdon has the 4th lowest temporary accommodation numbers in London. But it must be noted, the boroughs with less TA do receive significantly less homeless applications. Positively, and this, I was on a call this morning with DLUC, they have advised us to expect contact from other local authorities in order to share good practice. So something for us to be proud of there. In regard to rough sleeping, in our annual rough sleep account, which we do every year in November, we do actually carry out a formal count every month, but for government reporting purposes, we do a main count every November. We had our lowest ever count So we counted 9 rough sleepers in November. You must remember that before COVID, in our last official count, which was January 2020, because we do official counts every month, the count was 144 before COVID to 9 now. Our approach to rough sleeping has been a holistic service that seeks to take rough sleepers off the streets and support them into settled accommodation. We have partnered with health, social services and local support organisations to offer a truly enhanced support model that basically looks to save lives. We're very proud of what we've been able to achieve over the COVID period, and we do look to continue to grow this work as we go into this year. And I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, first of all, Mark and Dan, thank you for my constant moaning at you, but I feel because we've managed to house quite a lot of DV victims, we're actually guilty of our success, because victims know that they can approach us and they will be looked after. Question I've got actually is basically on rough sleepers. Do we have an estimate of the numbers of rough sleepers? Now, I don't want a number, but an estimate, who actually don't want any help, and technically they're invisible, because Councillor Farley and I know where there are a lot of rough sleepers, but they're transient, they'll move from one area to the other. But have you got a rough idea?
Yeah. In Hillingdon, we have about 5 entrenched rough sleepers that we engage with, I would probably say, on an almost daily basis, to try and encourage them to come in off the streets. Actually, coming into the beginning of January, we had 7. 2 have come in now, which is excellent, but we have 5. There's one there's various locations in the borough. And for us, it's repetition. It's generally, what we found over the years, it can be a life event for a rough sleeper, such as a friend of theirs on the street dying, that then encourages them to come off the street. I know that's is sort of a horrible, it's not a good thing to say, but actually sometimes it takes those events for them to come in off the street. For us and for our outreach team, so we have outreach in the borough and at Heathrow Airport most nights of the week. It's just constant intervention, trying to engage with them, especially with the COVID vaccine rollout, and trying to work with them to encourage them to come in. And we do offer different types of accommodation as well. So it's not off the street and into Olympic House, for example, which is our rough sleeper hostel. It could be off the street and into self-contained accommodation. And so we really do look at all options, but it's a constant sort of, it's constant work from us. And we were very happy this month that those 2 came in, but actually we've still got 5 that we are actively working with. Heathrow is a lot more transient, and per night at Heathrow we're engaging probably 10 to 15 rough sleepers every evening at Heathrow Airport still. Lots of them coming from across the capital and from across the UK. It still attracts people in just because of the sort of it's a very safe place to rough sleep. So we work very closely with Heathrow Travel Care, with Heathrow, which is the social services support on site, plus also with Heathrow Airport, to really engage with rough sleepers there, to either to reconnect them to their borough, to reconnect them abroad, and when we have to also, we will provide them local accommodation pending that reconnection, just to support them from the airport.
Councillor Gardner.
A follow-up. Do you work with TfL? Because I know that we've got people that sleep on the buses that go back.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you think of how a rough sleeper would get to Heathrow, it would be generally on public transport through the buses or the tubes. And actually, yes, so we have an active programme with TfL as well. And actually, the GLA has commissioned some outreach services just specifically to work on the buses. There's some very popular bus routes that end at Heathrow Airport that people can literally go backwards and forwards from central London and into London. And actually, when you're in the airport, you can get on buses internally between terminals without having to pay. And so actually, it can be attractive for a rough sleeper. Historically, we have noted that rough sleepers on buses tend to be younger adults, especially that sort of the under 30s. And so actually that's a key area of work. It's difficult with sort of working on the tubes is difficult. But what we are doing is with Heathrow Airport, when people are coming into the airport at night, we try and interact as soon as possible. Sort of how can we help? Why have you come to the airport this evening? how can we support you if you have come here because you want to sleep here.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark. I've got a few questions. But I'll start with the annual count. So it was good that you clarified that there are monthly counts, because once a year it seems a bit iffy. But even with that annual count that's being done for statistical purposes, what really does that tell us or tell the government about the numbers of homeless?
Yeah, the idea is, the idea is every local authority in the country, I mean, obviously for England, is expected to carry out an annual count, and it's generally we all choose the same night towards the end of November, just because we don't want to double count people. It's to give the government and us a snapshot of who may be sleeping out on any one night. And it certainly does not give a rolling number of how many people there are in total, but it's a snapshot of what the situation is on any one night in the country of how many people are sleeping rough. Some boroughs estimate, other boroughs do a count. We've always counted because estimates can wildly vary, and so for us, we literally. We bring officers in, we bring volunteers in, we work with the police, we work with CCTV, and we walk the streets of the borough. So it's not just the hot spots where we know rough sleepers are going to be, but it's also places where we've known them previously, and also residential roads where we haven't been before. So on that night of the year, the whole of London generally sees lots of council officers in high-vis vests with torches sort of going around, and we find people that way as well. It's still unfortunate that we still find people. I mean, I've been on the counts myself, and Hillingdon bus garage for us, Uxbridge bus garage for us, we used to find people there as well. But that's the idea. It's a snapshot of one night. There are, in London, we have a Pan-London database called Chain, which is again commissioned by the GLA, and that looks at the definitions they call it is called stock, return, or flow, which is quite a set of abbreviations, but basically when your stock are your rough sleepers who are on the street, your flow is your new rough sleepers coming in, and your returner are those who have been on the streets before but have come back in. At Heathrow Airport, our flow to Heathrow from April to December was about 460 rough sleepers. The flow at Heathrow Airport is coming through, so there's still a very high need of rough sleepers, and of course because Heathrow Airport is in our patch, as such, it's our responsibility to support them, working of course very closely with the GLA and the other boroughs that they may have come from to go to sleep in the airport safely.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you. I trust you also do parks as well.
Absolutely, we do. Yes, that's right. Yes, yes.
I'm aware, certainly in my own ward, of areas where people are sleeping in the bushes. And
that's it. And we would always encourage people to use StreetLink to make the referrals, because that's the direct link to our outreach service, and it keeps a very good auditable record.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. So you,
apologies. Yes.
You mentioned StreetLink. I might come on to that in a moment, but actually I'll do it now. Actually, while I'm thinking about it, the issue I've been doing up until sort of the pandemic came in. I was doing a surgery at a food bank, and we've had people come in there that are in a very bad way and homeless. I didn't, as much as I think StreetLink is doing a great job. It's the way that this is sort of being worked is that they have to be sort of found, or you to report them, they have to be there. There's some complication about 3 nights running, or in the same sort of location. They may have moved to a different place. It's very hard to sort of, you report it, and it's like 3 days before they get somebody out to potentially find the person if they're still in that same location. So while the intention is good, I'm not wholly convinced that it's as effective as it possibly could be in that regard. So that was sort of, as you mentioned it. Yeah. Just something else to just look on is the statistics on page 30. The bit at the top, table 7. The total individuals sleeping rough in a month, and of those new to rough sleeping, there's quite a significant jump in July, which I'm guessing, if this is last year's data, it's when the complete all the restrictions on the COVID came off in July of last year. I'm assuming possibly it's connected with that. But also, where's the first quarter of the year in that table? We're missing Jan to March.
Oh, apologies. Yes, we've just run it for the financial year.
Oh, I see.
There's no other reason. It's just because we started. We tend to do all of our tables on financial year.
Right. Okay. I see.
So the data is there, and we can provide that. Okay. We can provide that to you. Yeah.
But do you know why there's such a jump in July? Is that
I would have to I would have to have a look at that. There is a July, and the month before, obviously, the numbers are high. So it seems there is a drop in June. But no.
Yeah, I was looking at that. I mean, you've got April is fairly low, May a bit up, and June, and then it's sort of the rest of the year is particularly. Yes, no, I don't. I could. Out of interest from myself, I will look into that just to see why we did have the drop in June. I mean, if I may, Chair, sorry, if there's any commentary about your things about StreetLink, thank you. Yeah, so just quickly on StreetLink, it's the intention with StreetLink that it's certainly one night. And so, for example, for the last couple of weeks, we've activated what's called SWEP, which is our severe. It's across all of it. It's called a severe weather emergency protocol. So when temperatures drop below zero, it's basically we will house anyone who's rough sleeping or at risk of rough sleeping. Positively, for us in the last SWEP we activated, we didn't have anyone to house. We'd housed everyone who we needed to accommodate. But for example, there were 2 rough sleepers a week or so ago found at Tesco's, outside Tesco's in Hillingdon, in Uxbridge. The StreetLink referral was done at about 8 o'clock in the evening. Outreach picked them up at about 1 a.m. and they were taken to Olympic House that night. And they're still in Olympic House now. So that's the perfect situation where it does happen that quickly. Certainly we do know that there has been occasions where, due to the demand in the service, they haven't come out as quickly as possible. We get all the data, so I see the list of all of the StreetLink referrals that have been made in Hillingdon, and actually what we've done with that is we're able to map actually where there's particular hotspots for rough sleeping. But certainly in the majority of cases, outreach will be out that night. But of course, if you are aware of someone who's coming into your surgery, please do the StreetLink, but then please also raise a members' inquiry as well, and we'll look into that, because the work we do with the key is pre-rough sleeping, and it's about single homelessness of someone who may rough sleep next week or the week after, and what we can do with them to support them into accommodation, and that's for the whole of London, that's a really big piece of work for us going into next year, because we want to stop people at the trigger point of rough sleeping, which generally can be a crisis, but actually crisis can be brewing for a while, and we want to try and a relationship breakdown, for example, and we really want to try and engage early, because there are housing options for single people. And actually, we've been very successful in the private rented sector for single people. Moving into HMOs, we work very closely with Trinity, who are a local charity, with the YMCA, and we're very successful with getting people into good quality housing.
Thank you. Councillor Brightman.
Thank you, Chairman. Great report. Thank you, Mark. The number of people fleeing domestic abuse, has that gone up last year compared to the previous year? And if so, do you think it's because of the close proximity during lockdown?
That certainly could be a reason. I mean, the new domestic abuse legislation came in last year as well. Whether that has a direct correlation with an increase in approaches, I think we will find out as this year happens. Certainly, we know that COVID has meant a lot of families have been in very close proximity to each other for a long period of time. We haven't got any specific evidence linking it specifically to that, but certainly the majority of domestic abuse approaches we're coming there, it's from a settled tenancy. So it's not from a situation where they're in an unsecure housing option. They could be a social housing tenant, a housing association tenant, or a private tenant, but they are giving up that tenancy because of the domestic abuse. And so yes, there is conceivably a link to the close proximity of COVID and maybe the loss of employment, maybe the struggle that maybe households have had during that period. We have seen an increase from the year before, yes. I don't have the exact percentage, I can bring that back to the panel, but yes, we have seen an increase in our approaches. It always used to be that the highest reason for our temporary accommodation bookings were friends and family exclusions. So a family living with a family member, but actually the fact that domestic abuse has gone over that this year is a concern for us. And we're doing a lot of work internally as a council as well, working with our colleagues in social services to map that. So recently we've done a mapping exercise. We're looking at the approach postcodes, the tenures people have come from, to really understand what upstream work we can do to try and engage, again, much like for single homelessness, to try and engage at an earlier stage. Now that still may result in a family member having to move because of its domestic abuse. You need to move. But or there could be other options such as injunctions, etc. But actually it could be done without the crisis happening. And that's the key for us, stopping the crisis, stopping someone coming to the civic centre with their children, with their bags. And, today is day zero. So what can we do with this intelligence that we've got in order that actually we can work with a victim earlier so it can be done in a planned way, the children, not taking children out of school, etc. So it's a big piece of work for us to do. But the good thing is, we offer a very proactive service, and actually, if a victim does come into us, we will look to, we put them somewhere safe, and then work out what the support plan is going to be afterwards.
Thank you. Hopefully, with the end of the pandemic now becoming endemic, there'll be fewer cases of domestic violence. We hope.
Councillor Kaufman.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mark, for an excellent report, an understandable report. I'd just like to say two things. Firstly, when I was mayor, we did a tour of the rough sleepers in Hayes and the drug dealers as well. And what struck me was the courtesy in which your team approached a cardboard box with someone in it, and they knocked before they went in, and I thought that was absolutely superb. Secondly, do you actually see the same people rough sleeping? In other words, it's a sort of merry-go-round, and they keep coming back, or
Yes, is the answer to that. There's a project in London at the moment which is called Target 1000, and that's the intention that the 1,000 most prolific rough sleepers, those who are accommodated and then lose their tenancy, which can be from antisocial behaviour, such as continued drug and alcohol taking, or that leads them to lose their tenancy, means unfortunately they end up rough sleeping again. And so we, with every London borough, we have a list of what's called a Target 1000 cohort. On our list, we don't have that many, thankfully. We have sort of about 10 to 13 on our list. And of those at the moment, as I said, we've only got sort of 5 entrenched rough sleepers on our streets right now. But it is, with them and across London, it's repetition. Lots of rough sleepers are very transient as well. So a rough sleeper of Hillingdon at the moment could then go to Westminster and stay there for the next 6 months. But actually, there's some very good pan-London work goes on. I sit on. I'm one of 3 borough representatives on what's called the Life Off the Streets core group, which is a pan-London group chaired by the GLA, which looks to really try and end rough sleeping. And at the moment we're linking that pre-rough sleeper work with rough sleepers. We have a significant issue with non-eligible rough sleepers, so those rough sleepers who are subject to immigration control, and what options we can do for them, because they are limited. COVID is giving us an opportunity to take people off the streets that we may have not been able to before, and that's been great for us. But going forward, it's about looking about how we can support them into a settled life. In regards to your comment on sort of how we engage rough sleepers, thank you very much for that. there is actually we take a very practical approach, and most boroughs do as well. You know, there's very simple things. When you're walking around with a torch, you shine it at your face, not the right. And it's those things that actually you're going with open arms. You sit down next to someone and you're speaking to someone on their own level, and actually you're engaging in a conversation. You're not there to enforce. You're there to have a conversation. And if you can take someone off the street because of that, then that's excellent. But if you have to come back, then you do so.
Yep. Mark, can I just ask a question in regards to the rough sleepers, in regards to their backgrounds? Do you experience many from the former armed services and things like that? Was that your question? Sorry. And if so, how do you signpost them to the right?
Yes, absolutely. From time to time, it's not particularly high for us locally. But yes, we do. Our approach to rough sleepers, regardless of whether the military background or not, is still to accommodate as quickly as we can. But yes, with rough sleepers with the military background, we will pick them up, and then we'll engage with the military charities if they would like us to, because across London there are a number of housing options for those who have served who were rough sleeping. And so yes, we engage when necessary. Yes.
Councillor Chairman, I know it's a duplication, but do you want to comment based on that answer as a joint?
Having not asked the question, I would like to thank you for the answer. One thing that did occur to me, actually, I was going to ask that, but we are talking about Hillingdon, and obviously, if somebody is a rough sleeper, you get them off the streets, and for the sake of argument, they're from Leeds originally. I say Leeds because I'm from Leeds, sort of thing. I'm not going to ask you for it later. Would you be looking, is there a mechanism to proactively say, we will get you back to Leeds, back to your family? Or are you a Hillingdon resident?
No, there is, and we would look to reconnect if it was safe to do so. Lots of people have left their area because of a particular reason, and that could be that they may have been involved in crime, and they're leaving it because they feel that there's a threat towards them. But actually, Heathrow attracts rough sleepers from around the country, and with everyone who comes in, part of that assessment is, okay, so you've come from Leeds, what were the reasons, why? Can we engage with Leeds Council on your behalf to reconnect you? And yes, certainly, if they're a new rough sleeper in the area, statutorily, so by law, we can refer them back up to Leeds Council, and we look to do so where it's safe. There are some people where actually we'll make a decision that there's too many risks involved here, and so actually we'll see what local solutions we can bring in for you. But actually part of the work we do with Thames Reach, which is our commissioned outreach service, and with Heathrow Travel Care at the airport, is to reconnect. And actually we get expats coming into the country as well. And actually, a lot of the work that Heathrow Travel Care do is, okay, so you've been abroad for 10 years. Where were you before you came abroad? Okay, let's call that local authority and let's pay for a coach ticket and let's get you back up there. Because obviously Heathrow Airport is the airport of choice for when you have lots of flights coming back from from the Middle East, Far East, etc.
No, thank you for that. That's clarified it. Thank you.
Councillor Farley.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to touching on something the Chair mentioned, and also going back to the earlier element I was talking about earlier was one of the cases in point that I was referring to also was the out of hours service. If you're something happening on a weekend, trying to sort of get someone into accommodation, they're not sleeping out again Saturday, Sunday night, and then waiting for the office to come in. I was wondering if you could talk around what the council is doing with the out of hours service. Also, I'd like to know, with the Everyone In campaign, what sort of numbers, obviously, ideally, once they're in, but what sort of people, unfortunately, may have ended up back out on the streets? And also, so going back to where the Chair was talking about the sort of the background of people, what, if you've got any sort of particular strategy or anything around LGBT+?
The out of hours, so there's two out of hours services. We have our rough sleeper outreach team, which is commissioned through Thames Reach, and we also have an outreach team. Well, we also have an out of hours service run by our own homeless caseworkers for for households who may be homeless for another reason. So not rough sleepers, maybe a family eviction, maybe a domestic abuse approach, for example, that's out of hours. We run that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's a statutory requirement. And so tonight I have one of my caseworkers who has their phone with them all night. Some nights it's quiet, other nights they'll get a few calls. We have a contractual relationship with a number of accommodation suppliers who will happily take someone at sort of 2-3 in the morning if we need to do so. That runs at the weekend as well. So recent examples could include, there's been some fires, unfortunately, and so actually that's a classic example when our out of hours housing officers will get involved, and because they're our caseworkers, they're able to do sort of a mini assessment, if that's the right word, over the phone to see whether we need to provide accommodation. It's the officer's decision to provide accommodation that night, and that's delegated to them. And of course, a lot of officers will err on the side of caution. So if we have a young person, if we have a single female, if we have anyone who we think there is a risk to this person if we do not accommodate them, then we will. And if it's a weeknight, they come and see us the next day in the Civic Centre. If it's the weekend, we accommodate them for the weekend. And they come and see us the following week. For rough sleeper outreach services, it's exactly the same process. That runs also 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Obviously, for the outreach services, for our rough sleeping, it's mainly at night, but we do see people during the day as well. So there's been a number of times in the last year we've had rough sleepers identified locally in the borough, and we'll go out. We'll go out and we'll assess them, and that could be our officers and it could be Thames Reach. But we want to be accessible as much as we can. We don't get, I don't have the figures in front of me how many out of hours calls come through on a nightly basis to our casework team, but I can get that for you, so we can. But they're kept busy. So they are, which is not so. Ideally, we deal with everything in office hours. And that's what we're here to do. I think what the pandemic has shown is we're no longer a 9-to-5 service because of a lot of sort of the home working that we've been doing. Actually, a lot of the assessment and casework we do is in the mornings and the evenings, which is actually for some of our customers is when they're not at work, so they can engage with us better. And so actually we can continue those conversations into the evening. But for an emergency basis, it's 24 hours a day with an officer, and they just phone the Hillingdon switchboard, and that gets put through to our out of hours team. In regards to everyone in, so we with the GLA in sort of April 2020, we accommodated approximately just under 200 rough sleepers, which were picked up at the airport and picked up in the borough. We have approximately about, as of today, between 55 rough sleepers still in temporary accommodation with us. About half of those rough sleepers have no recourse to public funds. And that is a challenge for us going forward. So about half of those rough sleepers have no recourse to public funds, which means, and between those, a number of EEA nationals. So we are working with them to get their pre-settled status and their settled status, so they become eligible for benefits. And then we can bring them into the sort of mainstream housing options and rehouse them that way. And with the outside of the EEA, we're working closely with the Home Office, with the client's permission, to see how we can support them in regularising their status. Sometimes that's been successful. A number of our ex-rough sleepers have moved into accommodation provided by NAS, and so that's whilst their asylum claim is pending. But for others, there is a challenge for all of London about the support we can give to some of these rough sleepers. But we can continue to support them, and the government is very keen that we do so at the moment. Now, I believe the last question, was on just the background. Yes.
Thank you. It was just something the chair mentioned about the background of people. I was wondering what sort of, with sort of LGBT plus, I assume it's predominantly sort of the younger population that may have been kicked out of their homes, their parents or guardians have not, or maybe for other reasons that they may have been kicked out. I was wondering what sort of strategy you may have around that.
It's the predominant age range is 25 to 40 for rough sleepers. It's predominantly male. although we have seen an increase in lone female rough sleepers, which is a concern for us. I don't have the statistics on LGBT, I'm afraid, so I have to get those for you. It used to be predominant. We have seen over the last couple of years an increase in female rough sleepers, specifically Heathrow Airport. Now there's a very good reason for that. It's safer than a street. And so actually there's an opportunity for us also there to work with some very vulnerable people. We don't get a lot of under 25 rough sleepers at the moment, and actually on our last few rough sleeper counts that we've done, we've had no under 25 rough sleepers. And actually in the report, obviously the work we're trying to do with P3 and our Children's Social Services team is really move upstream with young people and homelessness to try and engage with them long before actually it's become a crisis in a household where a parent is asking, unfortunately, one of their children to leave.
Thank you, Joe. Yep, okay. I believe that's all the questions, unless anyone else has any urgent questions they wish to ask. In which case, thank you, Mark, for that presentation. Don't go anywhere because you're up next again. So we go on to item 8, which is the HMOs, houses of multiple occupancy. So whenever you're ready again, Mark.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And this report was also requested following the housing strategy session that we had last September. We've split this report into 4 main sections, and I just want to expand on those quickly if I can. We start with just an explanation of what is an HMO and what properties need to be licensed and which do not, because an HMO is basically when there are tenants sharing, 3 or more tenants sharing a property with shared facilities, that is an HMO. Does not mean it needs to be licensed. Mandatory licensing is for 5 households and above. We then talk about the actual numbers of licensed and suspected HMOs in Hillingdon, and then an explanation of the inspection process and the options for discretionary licensing as well. So at present, we have approximately 650 licensed HMOs in Hillingdon. Since April 21, and we've had a large increase in applications in December and January since we pulled this report together, we now have received over 172 applications since April 21. Our current intelligence estimates that actually our licensed HMOs should be double this. And we have an active programme of enforcement to inspect and ensure they are safe and that a licence is quickly applied for. Subsequently as well, we have a number of live enforcement actions in progress, and this is mainly due to breach and management regulations, such as, for example, a failure to provide smoke alarms. The inspection process includes a property inspection with specific regard to fire safety. During a lot of the COVID period, we, as with most local authorities, we were doing desktop assessments, and so now, as a service, we have a lot of catch-up to do with inspections of properties that we were unable to do during the height of the COVID restrictions. But over the last year, we've managed to inspect the majority of HMOs that we were licensing the year before. In regards to discretionary licensing, officers are reviewing the opportunities to raise standards, and this could include both additional licensing schemes and selective licensing schemes. And just quickly, I want to just explain the difference between the two. Additional licensing is specifically for houses of multiple occupation that do not fall under the scope of mandatory licensing. So, for example, a property with 3 tenants where they share facilities is an HMO but doesn't need to be mandatory licensed. However, a number of local authorities, because they have seen a rise in antisocial behaviour, maybe a lowering of standards, have actually introduced additional licensing schemes that says any property with 3 or more people in, we require you as a landlord to apply for a licence. And the council should have a good reason to introduce additional licensing scheme, and this needs to be evidenced as well, and it needs to be consulted. We can't just introduce the statutory consultation for that. In regards to selective licensing, this would be for all private rented properties in the designated area, such as a ward or an area of a borough. Historically, you'd have seen across London, specifically over the east of London, some boroughs originally introduced borough-wide licensing schemes. A lot of those, though, now are being wrapped up. And again, it's a statutory requirement that the council consult with all residents, businesses, etc. for the proposed area. So, for example, a ward in Hillingdon, if we thought there was specific antisocial behaviour or issues there. The council must evidence why it would want to introduce a scheme, and this would include persistent problems, etc. Councils can only introduce selective licensing where it covers more than 20% of the borough or 20% of private rented homes with Secretary of State approval. I think that's very important as well. And a number of boroughs across London have not consulted properly and have therefore been unable to introduce selective licensing and schemes. So it is very important to get the homework right. We've included at the back of the report a table that shows schemes in West London. And just for the purposes of this panel, we are reviewing, officers are reviewing, and will in due course bring forward options to members for what we would recommend in Hillingdon.
Thank you very much, Mark. I'll take questions from members. If I could just start with myself, though, the pages 36 to 37 on that comparison, I noticed that apart from Kensington, we're the only authority that doesn't offer a discount for accredited landlords. I was just wondering your thoughts on that as to why we don't, and if it's successful in other authorities that do.
Yes, and that's one of the work items we're looking at this year. Yeah, we would encourage all landlords, regardless of whether they have an HMO or an individual property, to be accredited. And there's a number of accreditation schemes, specifically in London. Part of all of our commissioning is what's called the London Landlord Accreditation Scheme, which is run by Camden Council but is paid for by all local authorities. And we do encourage landlords to apply for that. And of course, lots of the privately managed landlord groups also give sort of accreditation training as well. And yes, that's certainly something we will be reviewing and making recommendations on.
Thank you. And I also think the additional fees per room is also quite good, I believe. It keeps a tight grip on what we know about these HMOs. Councillor Gardner.
Yeah, in our particular ward, we've got several properties that are definitely HMOs, although they say they're not. But we've spoken to some of the residents who live nearby who said, well, the antisocial behaviour is unbelievable, there's drink, drugs, whatever. But also spoke to one of the residents of the premises who said that the landlord told him, if anybody comes round from the council, don't say you live here.
The powers we have to inspect unlicensed HMOs are very good, and actually, as long as we serve the right notices, we can enter properties, and we will investigate. The landlord is legally bound to respond to us if we request information from them, and we would obviously interview the tenants in the properties as well. We are aware of those sorts of situations, and of course for us and for our enforcement, from our enforcement arm, we will enforce. And so I know that a number of councillors have brought potential unlicensed HMOs to us, and they are on our work plan to inspect, and indeed I would hope a number of them have been inspected already.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, of course, Councillor Gardner.
Where there are properties in different wards that are in actual fact they're hostels for ex-offenders, but they're run by other boroughs, but they still have 4 or 5 people in them. Do we class that as an HMO, or is it the other borough responsible for it?
We would class anywhere where there's sharers as an HMO. The licensing requirements differ to who the landlord is and to the numbers in there. A lot of supported accommodation, so for example offender accommodation, may be run by a housing association. Housing associations don't need a HMO licence because, being a housing association, they're expected to understand the rules about how to manage these properties, and so therefore should manage them accordingly. But if they're not managed by a housing association and they're managed just by a private landlord, then yes, they would have to be licensed, and part of those licence conditions are good management, and so we would expect that to be management of antisocial behaviour, which doesn't just include behaviour, it also includes making sure the front garden is kept clean, making sure there's not piles of rubbish building up, making sure there's not fly tipping, and that's all work that we would enforce if we didn't think a landlord was managing a property properly. But we also will enforce against housing associations if necessary as well. And so if a housing association is looking after it, doesn't matter whether it's an HMO or a single dwelling, if we have issues with a property because of standards in there, then we will obviously engage with that housing association also.
Would you engage with another borough though?
Yes, we would. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because you have to remember, Hillingdon, especially for temporary accommodation, Hillingdon tends to be a net importer of temporary accommodation clients. It's an attractive borough for other boroughs to place in, and so we do attract placements by our neighbouring boroughs, and that includes shared accommodation. And actually, there's a Pan-London project at the moment, aptly named Setting the Standard, which actually looks to enforce and work with all landlords of temporary accommodation where it is shared accommodation, typical guest house type accommodation, where it could be used by multiple boroughs. And that really is looking at fire safety, looking at the amenities the tenants have access to. So it's a big project we're looking at the moment. And for us in Hillingdon, that's very good for us, because actually it supports us in the work we're doing with landlords where the property is being used by another borough.
Thank you very much. Just on the back of Councillor Gardner's comments, could I inquire about HMOs in regards to companies such as Airbnb, where we're seeing quite an increase in that, particularly around my wards, with being so close to Heathrow, where companies are just, as I say, letting these out for not long-term tenancies, not even short tenancies, days at a time, where you have people coming at all sorts of hours. And I can't help but feel it's causing some disruption to communities, and I just wonder what your take is on that. Do we actually class that as a HMO? What is really a tourism business?
I mean, a lot of the Airbnb stuff that we see is sort of it's small self-contained accommodation that unfortunately for our enforcement service, as long as the property is of a good standard, the landlord's entitled to do that. If it's an HMO and there's people coming and going, but it's still a sharers, and it's above the 5 sharers, then yes, we would look to enforce and licence appropriately. And certainly, if there are any properties that you're aware of, please let us know and we can have a look into those.
Thank you, Mark. Councillor Brighton.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you again, Mark. Great report. Just a quick one, really. Although not necessarily with HMOs, how do we engage as a council with things like the tenancy deposit scheme? Because as a private landlord, one would expect you to use something of that nature if you're renting directly.
Yes. So even though COVID has altered our landlord engagement work. We used to we have run some landlord forums since COVID started, and we're due to run a number this year. In fact, we're just putting together the agenda for our next landlord forum, and that is about our engagement with landlords, about how what the requirements are under legislation, the prescribed documents they should be giving tenants, and how they serve notice should they want to. But also the key for us is, as well as landlord training, what came out of our housing strategy consultation was tenant training as well. A tenant being aware that actually you're expected to, you on the day you move in, your landlord must give you this. And actually, if your landlord does not give you this, then actually there's various sort of challenges you can bring forward. And so our landlord forum is our main group for landlords. As part of our housing strategy implementation, we're looking at ways we can engage with tenants more, and of course engage with landlords more as well. Historically at Hillingdon, when we've done landlord accreditation programs, we've run them from here. So we've actually used the Civic Centre as a base to bring landlords in to offer that holistic training. A lot more is online now, and so we're working closely with the London Landlord Accreditation Scheme to work out how we can encourage more landlords, not just to become accredited, but also to do the add-on courses that just support them in the work they do with their tenants, especially around lots of our accidental landlords who may have inherited a property and they're not a portfolio landlord. It's very easy to make mistakes in setting up a tenancy, especially around the various tenancy deposit protection schemes, the various insurance-based schemes, the schemes where you actually the money's paid over. And so yes, that's a big piece of work for us this year. We run a good forum, but we can always do more. And so as we move into next year, we can bring forward the other sort of ideas that we have to work with landlords closer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions before we move on? Councillor Farley, do you want to finish them off? Thank you.
Chair. The inspections of HMOs, so the report says that you do them before or the licences are being reviewed. Would you have any reason to do spot checks on any HMO in the borough, or do you have to have a specific reason to visit a property that, I mean, I was wondering, just sort of like check on the quality, I guess, if there's anything in that regard, as well, I'm sort of going with it.
And yes, we can. And actually, you would think that any council with due diligence, with a portfolio of licensed HMOs, would have a rolling programme of actually maybe if we've had antisocial behaviour issues in a particular area, maybe the licensed HMOs in that area, and that is something we're able to do.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mark, and for your early presentation. Some very good reports, and please pass our thanks on to your colleagues in those departments as well.
Thank you.
We move on now to item 9, which is the review and the draft final report. Neil, would you like to introduce this, please?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. I'll be very brief. Obviously, members will be well acquainted with this. It's something that I put together following the witness sessions prior to Christmas, and it's now for comment and hopefully endorsement to full Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are members happy with the report to go as it is? I can see nods from the Conservative side, the Labour side. Councillor Farley.
Thank you. Thank you for putting this together. It's good. There's a minor thing. If my memory serves, on page 53, 54, Mr. Clark from the Leaseholders Association, I think he said he was the secretary, not the chairman, if my memory is correct.
Oh, okay, good spot. Yes.
So 53 and 54. That's page 11 and 12 of the actual report inside.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I will double check that and amend if necessary. Thank you.
Apart from that, are we happy, Councillor Gardner? Use your microphone, please. Thank you.
On page 65, the third bullet point down, I mean, that's absolutely fantastic, but I know you've got awareness campaigns so social housing residents know their rights. Can you put run, and can you highlight that as well, because, please?
That page in particular is a reproduction of the government white paper, so it's not something I've written. It's something I've just transposed in. So you want that particularly highlighted somewhere in the report?
I just want run and awareness, because otherwise awareness campaign, so social housing residents know their rights. But if you've got run and that's highlighted as well, do you follow me?
I do, but is that linked to our? Are you linking that to our recommendations? Because you're asking me to amend the government white paper.
No, I'm not asking you to amend it. I'm just asking you to highlight run.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. I thought I misunderstood. Okay.
No, I'm fine.
Sorry. I can do that. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that agreed? Thank you. Moving on to our Cabinet Forward Plan. Any questions, comments? Thank you, Councillor Gardner. Very swift. And our work programme noted. Thank you very much. Oh, you had to spoil it, didn't you? Go on.
If I may, so we have coming up the where is it now? SIL expenditure monitoring. That's next month. Just to be clear, we are getting the details of where that's come from, where the funds have come from, and where they're going, or what they've been spent on, or what's still to be allocated to.
I haven't yet seen the report because it's not yet to come from the report author. If I recall correctly, there was a new system to be in place that would allow for a greater granularity of data.
Yeah.
So I will absolutely double check that with the report author before it comes to me.
Right, please. Thank you very much for that. And then it's also we've got the redevelopment of the high streets, which is good, coming up in March. It was just another sort of, I think it may have been Councillor Brightman that sort of triggered this, but is there any scope within that to include an element of what's happening with how we're improving safety for our sort of town centres and things in that regard? I'm just wondering if that's at all possible. It was just something that was mentioned earlier in the meeting.
Yes, that might fall under the remit of the public safety part, but select committee, I should say. But again, I'll clarify that.
Happy to note that apart from those points. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you for your attendance tonight, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes our business for this evening. The meeting is now closed at 24 minutes past 8. Thank you very much.